Hi everybody, and welcome. My name's Damian MacLennan. I'm Damian M on Twitter. And I'm the CTO of a company called Work180, but I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. Firstly, I'd like to actually just thank all the organisers and crew here at NDC. Massive job pulling something like this together, and it's easy to take it for granted. So I think they've done an amazing job. I've been to all of the Sydney ones now, and it's awesome. This is my first time speaking here, though, so thank you to everybody for coming in. It's a little bit overwhelming, actually. There's so many good talks to choose from, so I really appreciate everyone coming in, though. On the topic, though, of people in the room, I just want to gauge a bit of experience. Who's using .NET Core? Everyone. Excellent. Who's using it with Docker? Half the people. Excellent. Cool, because I sort of struggled a little bit with how much .NET Core to do and how much Docker to do, so it'll be interesting. So today, basically, I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story, and it's something a bit different to a talk that I would normally give, where I'm, the expert in something or trying to be the expert in something. This is a story about a journey that I've been on with a new tech stack. Spoiler alert: it's .NET Core and Docker. And what I've learned, and there's some code into it, but it's basically a story that's not done yet. This is my journey. This is my field notes. So basically, this story, I'm somebody with a lot of experience writing code and shipping code and architecting code and deploying code, and I've got some pretty strong opinions about what good looks like, and whiskey. Yes, I've got some strong opinions on what I think good looks like. And then this year, I sort of got back on to writing a lot of code after a 2-year stint of management hell. And when I got back to that, the whole sort of tech world had changed underneath me. And so I had to make a whole bunch of technical choices, and being the first technical person in a startup. And a lot of my go-to patterns on this new tech stack just didn't work. The way I know how to do stuff had all changed. And I felt like I was sort of treading a whole bunch of new ground. And so today this talk is sort of my journey and some of the decisions I had to make and how I got there. And I'm not claiming to be the expert in this, and it's not the perfect solution. It is a journey, and that's why it's called my field notes. My friend Vanessa here said yesterday in a completely unrelated conversation, there's really no value in just hello world demos all the time, and there's no value in just pure success stories. And that's sort of the gist of my talk. It's this is where I've gone in the hope that some of my learnings give you some ideas, save you some time or whatever else, give you some different ways of looking at stuff. And we are just before lunch, and we probably won't have lots of time for QA, which is probably good because it won't put me on the spot. But this is something that I've learned through talking to a lot of people and whatever. So I would love, if you have different experience or more experience or some questions, I would love over the next day and a half people to grab me and chat through this stuff, because I'm really interested in learning about better ways to do stuff, and I think we can all get better. So a bit more background. I've been around for a while. I'm starting to feel like the grumpy old guy in the industry that's kind of seen it all before and all the cycles happen again. I cringed a little bit yesterday in the keynote when Dylan Beattie said, "I'm really old. I was born in 1978. And I'm like, oh. Beat you, mate. And I've been doing what a lot of people call sort of DevOps since well before it was cool. I think I started doing CI in about 2003. And a lot of deployment automation then, when it was a fairly out there thing to do. And I spent a lot of time doing consulting. Worked for Redify. There's Redify people everywhere today. Worked for Redify for a lot of years. And the team of people around me in Brisbane, we did a lot of rescue projects, essentially, where it was get in, everything's on fire, and we'd have to get in to solve problems and have some very difficult conversations where people wanted guarantees. And if anyone's done a lot of consulting, when someone says, "I want a guarantee that that's going to be fixed," and you're like, "Sorry, we can't have it." But what we got very good at, a mitigation for that, was we got very, very good at iterating very, very quickly. So we could say, "Look, we're not going to promise stuff, but you can track our progress from literally day one." So we got very, very good at automating our deployments, because that's the best way to actually show progress, is getting something to production and making it a little bit better every day. And getting those runs on the board. So we all got very, very good at writing deployment scripts and to ship code. And so every one of the consultants around our team would have their own Dropbox folder full of PowerShell scripts and whatever else to ship code. And it was on one of those projects that Octopus Deploy was born. Has everyone used Octopus in here? Most people, a lot of people. Is anyone from Octopus? Ex-Octopus. And that's, one of these projects on a Redify project is where Octopus was born. So basically Paul Stavel was sitting around at lunch one day and he's like, this is a solved problem. Like, we do this time and time and time again. There's got to be a product that can sort of follow these common patterns that we know to work. And so he left and started that company and built that product. So I worked with Paul at Octopus for a while in the early days, sort of building up some of the early team and engineering practices. And then at the beginning of 2016, I took a bit of a break from that and took on, like I said, management hell, an engineering management role in a sort of big company agile transformation that sort of needed some technical leadership. So I walked away from Octopus then. So anyway, after my experience, I have opinions. I thought that would get more of a laugh out of you, Rob. And it also turns out that the big companies trying to do a transformation at the same time as a merger, where they're the smaller fish, big opinions don't always fly, so I had to leave there. So at the beginning of this year, so all that preamble was to get to sort of this year, I joined a company called Work 180. I'm not going to go into the full pitch on Work 180. Essentially, it's a jobs board for women, and I'm more than happy to come and talk at great length about that. Or you can talk to Lorraine, my awesome colleague down here, about it as well. And it's a company that was started by some friends of mine a few years ago, and they built a business and proved this business on a third-party SaaS job platform. And it got to the point where the ideas for it and the international scale and things we wanted to do sort of outgrew that platform. So it came time to build our own platform that we could iterate on. And so that's where I came into this company. So I needed to make some tech choices. And I had the fun process of completely green slate, no one telling me what to do, which is awesomely fun and also very, very daunting, choosing a tech stack. So I had a few criteria. It needed to be productive for me mainly at first, but also then as I hired people, something that I could take my experience and bring people on and get them up to speed. It had to be performant enough. Performance, one of those things that, it had to be performant enough. I didn't want to have 1,000 server instances for 100 users. That would be not performant enough. It also had to be somewhat investor friendly. We have taken on some funding to expand overseas, and sort of as I got in the early days, I was having conversations with VCs and investors, and some of them would say, hey, look, what's your tech stack? And in that kind of startup investment world, if you go .NET on Windows, they go, who the hell are you? So yeah, it had to be somewhat sellable. It had to be something that I could hire for as well. So yeah, the sort of investor part, plus the ability to hire outside of my pool of normal people. I love all the Brisbane, Redify, and Octopus Deploy people, but I've worked with them all for years. So I wanted to work with some new people, which I did, and it's been wonderful. So I sort of didn't want to go with the sort of normal thing that I know. And also the investor thing, I didn't want to go and fire up an enterprise Windows stack. And it's also not super cheap to run Windows instances compared to Linux ones. So I considered a few things. I considered Python. I'd been doing a little bit of Python, doing some sort of data manipulation. I like Python, but I didn't really love the idea of trying to run that on a server-side process to serve web requests. I didn't really like the performance aspects of that. Same goes for Ruby. That's probably my 1,000 server instances for 100 users. Also, I'm completely uncomfortable in Ruby land. Node I considered pretty seriously. Also considered Go, but I didn't know anything about Go, and I don't know any Go developers in Brisbane, so that was tricky. Considered something on the JVM. I knew some people that was having a lot of success with Kotlin, server-side Kotlin, and that looked cool. But I knew that was going to be a pretty big learning curve on the JVM. I mean, just Gradle's a big learning curve. Who's used Gradle? So yeah, ultimately, like .NET Core, it has great performance metrics. I could say .NET Core on Linux and Docker, and people go, oh, okay, that sounds cool. And it was familiar enough that I knew that there would be a bit of a learning, but I could get into it, and I knew that I knew C# really, really well, and I could teach that. So I ended up with .NET Core and Docker. That was obvious. We're a startup. You have to use Docker. It's the future. Linux, from a cost point of view, made a lot of sense. Postgres made a lot of sense as well. I didn't, again, want to be paying for SQL Server licenses. And MySQL, I have opinions about MySQL. Also considered document databases. I probably won't get a chance to talk about that today, but come and talk to me about document databases. So, yeah, Postgres made a lot of sense. It's fast, it's ridiculously stable, it's pretty battle tested. AWS, I've used the yellow cloud and the blue cloud both quite extensively. And sorry to my Microsoft friends, and I had this chat yesterday, I find the yellow one a little bit more stable and predictable. That's all I'm going to say about that. Also knew that I didn't want to manage infrastructure by hand, and I played a little bit with Terraform and knew enough to be dangerous. I still know enough to be dangerous. And also I thought, while I'm at it, I'll throw away Windows. I'd sort of slowly been moving away from Windows and decided to go all in on the Mac. And I knew that meant giving up my beloved ReSharper shortcuts. And yes, I know about Rider. But I just decided to go with VS Code because it's amazing. The iteration on that product is really cool. Haven't mentioned anything about front end here. That's one of the things that I have fewer opinions about, and I decided to wait till I could hire somebody that knew more about that and had more opinions. So that was Loren. So we ended up with React. I figured it would be React or Vue. I do have opinions about Angular. So we've ended up with a combination of sort of ASP.NET MVC, a lot of server-side stuff with React components, and then some other React server-side, React single-page apps as well. So, feeling like a beginner again. So at this point, I've basically been away from code for 2 years. Has anyone taken a break from writing code, sort of in a management stint, and then gone back in? Few. It's hard. It's really hard. And after 2 years, I felt like an absolute beginner again. And firstly, because I was rusty, and that sort of comes back quickly. But also, everything had changed. Everything I knew had changed. .NET Core, I understood the C#, but there was enough sort of changes to the, the MVC stack and, the whole build pipeline or whatever, the build system and the runtime, and it had all changed. And then I realized that every single thing that I knew about building and deploying software with this tool set that I had picked was completely out the window. And that's a frightening place to be, if anyone's kind of been that. No, it's a really frightening place to be. It reminds me of, and again, showing my age, when .NET happened, sort of going from classic ASP and VB6, and it's just like, what is this whole new world of, what is a click event on a web button for? But heaps of fun and really, really liberating. And I have to say that I have really rediscovered a joy of writing code this year. And the sort of, as you progress through your career, you kind of get to this point where it's like, oh, I used to do that. I've had so much fun writing code this year. It's been great. But what I did realize that pretty much everyone that was talking, going to user group talks and talking about .NET Core and talking about Docker and writing blogs about it, they really weren't getting past this. And I don't know if it's just a .NET community thing, but we seem to have this real thing of like wanting to jump on the next bandwagon. And it's like, ASP.NET, MVC, Core 2.1 comes out and all the Hello World talks get wheeled out again. And it's this really frustrating thing that I've noticed in the .NET community. I don't know if it happens in other communities. If anyone's got some thoughts on that, I'm happy to hear them, but it seems to be this real .NET thing. And no one sort of ever really goes further than that. And part of it's the user group format. Like, it is hard to get across a complex idea in a 40-minute session. I get that. One exception, though, and I have to give a massive shout out. And I wish he would come to Sydney at some point to a conference so I could buy him a beer. Andrew Locke. Has anyone heard of Andrew Locke or read his blog? Fantastic. So many times I'd be Googling, like, how do I do this? And I'd come across Andrew Locke's blog, which is at andrewlocke.net, and just save me so much time. So if you are getting into this, go have a look at that. He's just released a book that, go buy that. Fantastic resource, his website. So, what I had to figure out, .NET Core. And some of the newer patterns, how to do configuration, logging, application structure, how to do builds, how to do testing, how to do CI. how to build container images, how to host container images, how to deploy them, how to manage the infrastructure. And again, remember with all these things, I have lots of experience in doing this in other ways, and you know, so you know, I could figure out how to build, but then I had once I could get a container image, I had to get it online somewhere, and then it's like, okay, container orchestration. It was just all of a sudden I'm the dog going, I have no idea what I'm doing. And anyway, that's kind of, there's a lot of preamble, I get that, but that's sort of, the journey, and I sort of want to talk through some of the details and some of the stuff I've learned. And again, there's things in there that are not finished. So this is, I'm kind of bearing my soul a little bit too. So yeah, please come and talk to me later if you've got ideas, and we can all learn from it. So yeah. The first thing, now here's where I have to break the whole presenter mode thing and help. Where's my VS Code gone? Where's my mouse gone? I think it's time to just mirror this stuff. Cool. Cool. So one of the things that seems to be, oh, that's terrible. How do we zoom this? Sorry. Sorry?
If the lighting in the front is switched up, it might be better.
The lighting, yeah. Yep. Is that better? It's a bit better. Yeah, so there seems to be a fair amount of consistency around how we structure the actual app itself. Everyone sort of seems to agree that you can have a source directory, and in that you've got your application code, and then you can have a test directory. That seems to be fairly consistent now. So there's probably nothing too groundbreaking in here. A couple of things I like to do. Who uses AutoFac? Most of you? Excellent. Who uses sort of conventional registration of stuff? Yeah, cool. So that's something I really like to do, is basically in your AutoFac startup, say, look, register assembly modules, and then you can just drop a module in and put some conventions in, and it saves you a whole bunch of just remembering to wire stuff up, so a lot of conventional-based stuff. Something I've always felt was I always hated code that reached into configuration all the time, so I always like to sort of wrap that in something that you could inject. Does everyone do that? Yeah, some people? No. .NET Core made that a little bit tricky. You sort of had to inject its configuration into your configuration thing. And I'm still not 100% happy with how we're doing this. I don't like shipping lots of configuration files with secrets in it. I don't like that at all. I liked the octopus way of doing things, where you had your web config with a key value store, and you could ask for a key value. And so your source repo doesn't have all the configs for all the different environments. But that sort of goes against the grain with Docker, because you want to sort of build that image and ship it. And so yeah, you can use environment variables there, and that's not really ideal either. So something I always like to do, where's my presentation gone? There it is. Something I've always liked is, has anyone seen Config Injector from Andrew Harcourt? Some of the Brisbane crowd have. So basically the ability to define a setting class and register them all with the container and push them all in. And it's a really nice pattern, because what it will do is it will look through your web config file in a sort of traditional .NET world. It will scan through that, and it will scan through all of your settings, And if you don't have a setting class for a particular config entry in that config file, it will blow up at startup. So it stops people from sneaking in weird configuration things that you don't know about. And it will also say, if I'm expecting a setting to be there and it's not in the config, it blows up on startup. So it makes your app really, really predictable. And that's a really, really nice pattern. And I've sort of not found the real equivalent of that yet with .NET Core, because we've got this awesome thing where we can have, you know, a lot richer object model in our configuration, but that doesn't really fit with the just inject a single setting. So I know Andrew's been working on a way to do that a little bit better, and it's probably something I'm going to work with him on, so that you can take a dependency on a setting and that setting might be a rich class. So this is something that I'm still not 100% happy with. So at the moment I'm sort of going with this configuration model, and that could be a string or it could be something richer that you can deserialize out of the JSON. One of the nice things though is once we do get into container land, I can use environment variables to override, you know, right down into there. But again, that gets really, really ugly. I've, you know, spoken to people doing this stuff, and they have these deployment databases that basically have all of their configuration settings, like down all these levels, and they're basically writing out, you know, 250 environment variables when they deploy a container, and that can get really, really hideous as well. So I don't think this is a really solved problem yet. So that's kind of on my list of of ugliness. And yeah, if anyone's solved that in a really, really nice way, you have? Cool. Come and tell me about it later. So yeah, and I've got some thoughts on that. But yeah, I would love to have a chat to you about this, because I was sort of, after going through this exercise of putting this talk together, I actually would like to work on sort of publishing some stuff on GitHub of, you know, here's how I think this could work. So this is, like I said, this is part of my journey. So yeah, configuration management. The other thing that I like to do is Serilog and Seek. Is everyone using Serilog and Seek? Okay, so everyone else in the room needs to use Serilog and Seek. So Seek is a logging server, structured logging server, written by some of my good friends. One of them's over here. Again, the Brisbane Mafia is coming for everyone. So Serilog lets you write structured logs. So structured logs are not just a string that, you know, you have to go and find all the strings in your log files and grep through them all. It actually creates message templates and then puts data in there, which lets you be able to go and query that and filter it really, really well. So Serilog does that, and then it has this really nice thing that says let you read its builder out of configuration. So in my configuration, I can say, hey, Serilog, write to Seek, that's the server name, and I can put an API key on there, and when I run stuff up, it pushes it into there. This is an amazing tool for debugging your code in production. Because one of the things that once you are in Docker, you know, who still like RDPs onto a web server and, you know, searches through log files to find out what went wrong, you know, on a Tuesday morning when your customers are complaining at you. Yeah. In a Docker world, that's even harder, because then you've got to all of a sudden want SSH into the box and, you know, then grep through it, and, you know, like, if you can even get into it in the first place and find things like it's all very ephemeral, you don't really want to go and, you know, shell into your running containers to find logs. And Seek makes that super duper easy. So that's a plug. Yeah, but it lets you really drill down into some finer detail that I don't have because I spun that up. Actually, that's probably worth mentioning now. Seek. One of a great gentle introduction to Docker is start to use it for your dev dependencies. So that's running in Docker now. So that was sort of how I got into doing this. Like, well, I want to use Postgres, so I'm going to go and find a container for that, and I want to use Seek. So you can start to get a feel for Docker if you're not using it yet by just pulling in a lot of the dev dependencies, which is great. You know, if you are a consultant or work on a lot of different stuff. I sort of used to have, you know, I'd repave a laptop and all of a sudden I'd have, you know, MongoDB on there, and I might have Couch on there, and I might have Redis on there, and I might have, you know, all these different runtimes, and I might use 2 of them for one project and another 2 for a different project, and this way, you can just kind of go, bring up that stack, turn down that stack when you go and work on the next project. So Docker for your runtimes is fantastic. So the next thing that I had to figure out was how to build them. So again, you see a lot of these demos, and it's .NET Restore, .NET Build, and that's all well and good, but in pretty much no instance in my professional career was that what it took to build it. You might have to bundle assets, you might have to set up versioning, you might have to do all these things, you might have to do some extra packaging, build a library, whatever it is as part of your build. It's very, very rare that you have a production build that is just run the compiler. Like, that's one step. And so through my career, I've used all sorts of different ways of orchestrating that. I've used nant. Who remembers nant? A few older people in there. I don't feel so old now. Hi, Glev. nant, Saki, which is PowerShell make. That was fun. I've done horrible things with MS Build. Everything with MS Build's a bit horrible. And I've even gone down the path of orchestrating the whole thing, in a CI server like TeamCity, where you've got, yes, you have a compile step, but you've got 10 other steps as part of your build chain in TeamCity, which is all well and good until you lose your TeamCity instance, and then you go, how did I build that software? Bitter experience in the room. So my favorite one, and it has stood the test of time for a couple of years, is Cake. Has anyone seen Cake? Cake is wonderful. So Cake is C# make. We're a very creative bunch in this industry. Cake is a build orchestration language, DSL essentially, built in C#, which is really wonderful because if you are writing code in C#, it's far less of a mental shift to go and write your build code in C# than it is to jump into Ruby or XML or PowerShell. Does anyone find with PowerShell that if you're writing it every day, it's easy, and you skip one day of PowerShell, all gone, It's like working out with kettlebells. You can do that all the time, and you take a few days off, and you pick it up again. The next day, you can't walk. That's PowerShell, like one day off PowerShell, and I just forget all of it. And I worked for a company that basically did PowerShell all day long. Yeah, Cake is wonderful. So you can specify targets, and when you run this target, you have all these dependent targets. So I can have a build target and a clean target and a publish target and stuff like that. So I can orchestrate my build, and I know that will work all the time. So if you're not playing with Cake yet, even on sort of traditional .NET, totally recommend that one. It's a really good, consistent way to build software and run software. Just selling you on tools today, I know. So the next thing is building a container image. So again, this was, I'm used to, in the world that I had lived in before, as part of my Cake build, the end of it, it would bundle everything up, and it would call, new pack or NuGet or something like that, and zip stuff up, and there'd be my versioned artifact, and I could push that into Octopus deploy or something like that, and you take that artifact and drop it on a server, and sort of deploying apps to servers was something I knew really, really well. And again, all of that's changed. You sort of, now you're shipping your entire runtime, and that makes a lot of sense because I'm sure a bunch of you work in a big enterprise where some team wants to upgrade some new version of something, and everyone freaks out because you've got some incompatible version of the runtime on a box, and it's like, oh, all of a sudden you're going to need 3 weeks of regression testing to be allowed to do a point upgrade to fix a critical bug. Anyone? Docker's wonderful for that because you can ship your entire runtime, and it makes upgrades really, really easy because I can upgrade that project and put it there, and it's just going to be completely isolated as a process from something else. So that's great. But then it comes to building it. So, again, going back to the way I used to do it, it would sort of make sense that you could build your code and publish the code and then take those artifacts and push it into Docker. But that sort of then loses the build isolation as well. So where Docker's fantastic is I can have my build environment in a container, which is awesome because, again, if you've been in an environment where somebody wants to build something with a different version of a runtime, and all of a sudden, your 10 build agents have some incompatible thing, and you've got to make sure you get the right build agent or upgrade them all at once, and all of a sudden you're not allowed to upgrade something because your build agent's uncompatible. Has anyone lived that fun dream? Yep. Where's Sam? I know, I saw him a minute ago. Someone had to manage that full time. So yeah, building in a container is wonderful. And there's a couple of ways to do that, I found as well. So as I started to look into it, I found that in some different environments, like particularly like the Ruby world, they would sort of build lots of containers. They would have a container where they configured it to run a set of unit tests, another container where they would run some integration tests or whatever. And so as part of their build process, they'd spin up lots and lots of containers, which completely freaks me out, actually, because I'm sort of from that you build your artifact once. So that was sort of really, really weird to me. And where I ended up was building and testing in a container. Now, there was lots of Docker experience in here as well. So everyone using multi-stage builds? Yeah. Lots of nods, a few hands, yeah. So for those who don't know, Docker has this great thing called a multi-stage build, where you can basically specify a container image that has all of your build runtimes and SDKs and stuff like that it takes to build stuff. And then you can take the artifact out of that container and push it into the next container. And that works really, really nicely. Actually, I should go back just quickly to look at the output of Cake. Gee, that's awful, isn't it? Bigger. So if I run my build shell script, it will bootstrap everything and run all these targets in Cake, and it does all the stuff. And it cleans out all the bin and object folders, and it default MVC template has a whole bunch of just mismatched versions of things, which is a good time. Yeah, so Cake will clear out folders, and I've got to publish like a dist folder where I can push my publish stuff into, so it sort of cleans it out. Because it's always fun when you make some upgrade and you build, but you've got something sitting in your obj folder, and it behaves weirdly. So that's the output of my Cake build there, which is cool. So anyway, then the next thing that I had to figure out was getting that into that Docker file. So, and again, I stole a lot of this, I think, originally from Andrew Locke. So it really is a good place to go and find some of that stuff. But yeah, I can specify this .NET SDK image that has everything under the sun in it, and then I can install Node on it and then throw that away to do any kind of asset packaging and stuff like that. And then I just basically copy all the files in and then run my build. So it's really, really consistent. And then I can take the output of that that I've put in my dist folder and copy it into a new container that's based off this runtime image. And if I were to run that, NDC Sydney. I'm saying, hey, look, do a Docker build in this directory, sort of find the Docker file, tag it. NDC Sydney, if I could spell NDC Sydney. And I've run that earlier today, so it's pretty quick. So Docker caches every file system layer. But now it's getting in and running my Cake stuff inside the container. Cool. So now if I were to go and do a Docker image, I have a lot. I can see I've got my builder image that's 2 gig of stuff, and then my runtime image, which is a whole bunch smaller. So that makes it easier to, I'm pushing smaller images around to servers, so that's going to make my initialization time a lot faster, and it sort of reduces my surface attack area if anyone were to try to get into that container, because I'm not shipping Node. don't mean to throw shade at Node, it's just. So what I have lost with this, what I have lost is in my nice old safe Team City world, I'd have a build and I could see all the tests pass and I could drill down into that and it's all really wonderful. In my new world, I get this and that's not as comforting, although I do have a few tests. And that's something that I've sort of, like missing in this new world. And so there's a few solutions. One is I could take the test artifacts out of that, the test reports, and go and push them into something and, surface a dashboard of them. But certainly it's something that doesn't have the nice overview of it. Again, if someone's got a beautiful solution to that, I'd love to hear it. So I can build a container on my image. So I can build a container image on my local machine. That's wonderful. That's also completely useless to me as a professional. So then I started to dive into the world of CI. And so, like Team City has always been wonderful to me. We get on very, very well. But it sort of didn't feel like the right tool for this. And also, while I'm in the mode of I'm going to throw out everything I know and start again from scratch, a friend of mine, who I am still friends with, recommended that I start playing with Jenkins. And Jenkins is incredibly powerful. And the selling point was that you can have a Jenkins file and you put that in your repo and it will watch your GitHub organization, and when you push in your repo, it'll go, there's a repo, I can see a Jenkins file in there and just build up your stuff from convention. So that's one of the things that I was going to mention around structuring the app earlier was, and this is something that's really, really nice, is it's all command line driven, which is super cool. So you could write a shell script or something, or use something like a Yeoman style site bootstrapper, where you can say, I want a new service and it's called this, and it will go and create the directories and do the .NET news and the add reference and all of that kind of stuff, because it's all from command line, yeah? I can spin that up. I even think yeah, so I can basically script this. So like the little solution that I've got, I spun up completely from the command line. So you could script that. You can automate it, which is really good in an organization where you're trying to get people to adopt new stuff, is just remove the friction. So a little bit of a side story. I was speaking to some people from Amazon one day and they said, look, the thing that really got them moving around the whole service-oriented architecture thing was making it super easy for somebody to spin up a new service. There was a little web app they went to internally and they went, I want a new service and I want to call it X, and it would go bang, spit out this stuff from convention and go, there's your repo, have fun. And you can do that really, really nicely with .NET Core because it is all very command line driven. So that's super cool. The other thing you can do, and this is what we're doing, is sort of build up a templated Git repo that you can say, I want to clone this thing, and all of your common stuff is in there. So we called ours Orphan Black. Nobody got that joke. So yeah, anyway, CI. So I started playing with Jenkins, which I sort of liked the idea of, having a Jenkins file in your Orphan Black repo, and it just spin up and work. And then, I started going, okay, well, do I build on this agent and put it on this thing, and I'm building a container, but I'll probably run my CI thing in a container, and all of a sudden I've got Docker in Docker in Docker, and I'm just playing Docker Inception, and it's like, nah. And at one point I went, this is crazy. And so again, I reached out to my network for help, and I sort of started talking to a few people that were doing this stuff, like not on .NET, but on other platforms, and got some advice. And one of the things that I was pushed towards was a tool called CodeShip, which is a hosted SaaS CI tool. And I tried a few others, and CodeShip was the first one I had any level of success with. So went with that. Again, that took a little bit of doing, because all of their documentation was like, you have these services and steps, and they have all of these services combined, set up where, like, this is the service to do your testing, and this is the service to do whatever. I'm like, I just have one thing, and I just want to build it, and none of the documentation actually catered for that. I'll quickly kind of talk a little bit through how this works. Basically, you've got a couple of YAML files that sit in your repo, And you know, I have this service, and this is the image, and it's got this local Docker file, and I can specify environment variables to push into that as well. I'll come back to that one in a moment. And then as part of your build, you this was a problem with CodeShip. They sort of expected all these steps to be there, but I didn't have a second step. I just wanted to build the thing because I hadn't gotten as far as pushing it anywhere. But essentially, you know, I've got a step that pushes it to ECR, which is Amazon's container registry. So so CodeShip basically you set up these YAML files with stuff, and to push stuff into AWS, they offer all these little helper containers that do stuff. So they've got an image, which is the AWS ECR Docker config generator. So if you use something like Docker Hub, you create a login for it, and then you can push containers to it. ECR works a little bit differently. You use your AWS credentials, and it gives you a token, and you can use that token for 12 hours to push through. So they've sort of bundled all of that functionality into this helper thing. And they have a command line tool where when you create a project, and I won't go through this whole process. Basically, you create a project in CodeShip, and it will give you an AES key, and you pull that down, and you use that to sign your AWS keys, and then you can push that encrypted file, you know, which looks something like that. You push that up, and it will use that to associate stuff. And that took a whole bunch of shenanigans to figure out and understand, because the documentation for that and for my scenario were pretty much non-existent. But once we got there, I get a fairly nice output. It's not Team City nice, but it's pretty. And I can see my output there. So again, I'm missing this build had this many tests, and these ones passed and these ones failed. Actually, if it fails, your build's broken. So yes, if something does go wrong, you still find yourself digging through logs to figure out what went wrong. But it's it's the simplest tool that I found to get a good workflow. So now I've got a build. I can build an image. I can have someone else build that image. And then my next problem is, where the hell am I going to put it? And that's then opened up a whole bunch of stuff. Kubernetes, everyone's talking about that. Amazon doesn't have that yet. I even looked into building my own Kubernetes cluster. And then I realized that was a completely foolish thing to do. So I walked away from that. I looked at Rancher. I know that Azure, had some Kubernetes stuff, but I know it was a little bit behind. Talking to a bunch of people, and eventually ended up with ECS, which is Amazon's Elastic Container Service, and it actually it doesn't give you all the features of Kubernetes, but it was enough, and it was where I had some success. Has anyone used ECS? Yeah, a couple of people. So yeah, it works. It works. But to do that, I had to actually build the infrastructure. So I didn't want to go into the AWS console and clicky, build all the servers. I wanted it to be a little bit more automated than that. So at that point, I had to learn Terraform again. But essentially, very stripped down. I've got some EC2 instances that the ECS API controls. I've got a Postgres database on RDS behind that. And then I've got a Bastion host, and these things have all the security groups and lockdown. So I can SSH into the database if I really, really need to, which I try not to do because it makes you a bad person. So yeah, that's essentially what the ECS infrastructure looks like, and you just have as many instances as you need for scale. And also, if you want to roll out a new version, you sort of need some spare instances to deploy them onto. And again, if someone's interested, I stole and modified a lot from this repo here. A guy named Alex has a project. If you Google ECS Terraform GitHub, you'll find this, and it was a pretty good starting point for creating that script. And I'll show you. Has anyone used Terraform? Handful of people. So basically, it gives you a DSL for specifying infrastructure as code. And so I can specify an application that has an ELB with some stuff there, and I've got some variables in there so I can run it in different environments, and then I specify my actual service on there. And then I can use, and this is where you jump into Amazon's JSON format to define that service, but basically it looks a lot like a Docker Compose or something like that. It sort of specifies all of the images and how they run and what ports they can talk to and stuff like that. And I can pass environment variables in if I want. So basically what Terraform lets me do is on top of this infrastructure, define a service, push some JSON in and get it up and running. So yeah, again, if that's something that interests you, Google ECS Terraform GitHub and you'll get into there. Yeah, so I showed the Terraform for defining an app, but basically my apps at the moment look a bit like this. So I've got CloudFront in front, and it's doing some caching and some SSL termination, and it's a DDoS protection. There's a really good talk if you go looking for it, an engineer from Slack, and they talked about using CloudFront to sit in front of their API, and they actually do that with like zero caching. They've got caching completely turned off, but they found that they managed to speed up connection latency like in a measurable way. They're far more expensive tools than I do, so I haven't measured it. Basically by offloading the SSL termination to somewhere local. So like if you hit Slack in Australia, you're still hitting their API instance, in the US, but your SSL is terminated here, and the handshake of that is actually a noticeable thing. So that's really nice, and AWS basically give you SSL certificates for free and install it. It just makes that super easy. So that's a really nice pattern to look into. Then I talked to a load balancer, which talks to an Nginx proxy, which then talks to my app container, which has Kestrel. Was anyone Barry's talk yesterday, Barry Doran's talk? He said in 2.2, they're finally going to say, yes, you're allowed to put Kestrel on the internet. And so I went and had a chat afterwards, and he said, like, any one of these things is enough for in terms of like hiding Kestrel from the internet, because their concern is less about the web serving, but more about attacks that are going to be holding connections open and try to block sockets and stuff like that. Then I had a chat to my friend Gert over here last night, and they found something interesting with Kestrel, which is it has no request queuing or rate limiting in it at all. So they found when they got hammered with a lot of traffic, which they do, that AWS helpfully scaled up to, what, 5,000 instances? So that none of them were waiting ever. So yeah, from a security point of view, it's probably going to be okay soon enough to remove some of these layers. But I suspect you probably want something like that in front of it to just manage that extra stuff. So that was I'm sorry you felt that pain. I was grateful for your learning. So now I'm sharing it with everyone here. So yeah, that's what our code looks like. Then it comes to deploying a new version. So there's a couple of ways of doing this, and the one we've basically going with is a version that we want to deploy. We'll tag that with the environment that we want it to go to, and then we can say to ECS, do a new deployment, and it will find the latest image that matches that tag. Which is a little bit different again from what I'm used to, saying like this environment has version 1.2.37 in it. Instead, we're saying deploy the latest that I've got tagged with staging or production, and just kick off a new deployment. That's how we're doing it, and I don't love that. A nicer way to do it would be to specify the container image version to do that. But at the moment, I can say tag the image, refresh your deployment. But to be able to say, put version 1.3.7 in that environment requires me to go back and change my Terraform. Oh. And specify it here, which then all of a sudden I'm mixing kind of deployment concerns with infrastructure specification concerns, and I'm not loving that. So that one's still that I've not, it's like what we've got is working really well for us at the moment, but I'm not loving it. Another approach that I've spoken to some people about that they're doing, and this is quite massive, they've actually built their own deployment database system. So when they have a build that succeeds, they and this is on AWS, if they have a build that succeeds and it pushes to ECR, that will kick off a Lambda which sends that build information to a deployment database that they've got, which will then kind of figure out what configuration parameters and on the fly generate that configuration JSON and push it into ECS, which is a pretty big undertaking. And they're the ones that have like 250 environment variables because they built their own configuration management database as well. And it's possibly something like a tool like Octopus could solve this because they've essentially done the same things. Like you've got your versions, you've got your environments, you know what versions make up a release in that environment and what configuration variables. But yeah, they're using that to then build up that big JSON file, which gets really big because of all their environment variables, and push it in. So that's another approach to it that possibly as we scale we might need to get to, or maybe something like Octopus will fill that gap. Again, if someone solved that really, really nicely, I'd love to hear about it. Have you solved that one? Yep, excellent. You're my new best friend. So yeah, that's kind of where we've got to with that one. So nearly out of time. A couple of fun little gotchas that I've hit along the way. One is ECS is sometimes unreliable. I think it has a bit to do with sort of the underlying infrastructure provisioning. Every now and then you go, do a deployment, and it'll go when I feel like it. It's just where the ECS. So you hit that one? Yeah. Another one that I hit was I had specified too short a health check timeout window, and my health check hit an API call that scanned the database, and I hit a point where I had enough data in the database and I hadn't indexed it correctly because I was still wildly iterating. And all of a sudden, my health check wasn't returning in time, so my deployments would constantly fail. And this happened one late Friday night when I was probably a little bit sleep deprived, and I just kind of went, I'll just nuke the box. The auto-scaling group will pick it back up. Maybe the box is broken. And of course, it was actually my health check timeouts were broken, and I brought everything down for a couple of hours. So that was a fun one. I tell Loren all the time, my life is a cautionary tale. I had some notes here of some other fun things that I've hit along the way. Yeah, just ECS being a little bit unpredictable. Yeah, deployment walking up taking too long. Yeah, me getting frustrated using the box. The other thing that I've hit sort of along the way, and this is sort of the differences across platforms, is a lot of what I do at the moment is hitting our customer sites to sort of read jobs off their site and import them into our system. And something can be working completely beautifully on my local machine and then completely dies because the SSL validation across the different .NET Core runtimes is completely different. So the Linux SSL validation is a lot more strict than the Mac ones, which is an argument for kind of building and running and testing in the container all the time. But I do like that sort of fast feedback loop of being able to work locally on my machine all the time. So there's some fun gotchas. Some things that I'm doing next, better configuration management. Like I said, I sort of want to look at the config injector project and how to bring it into this world, and sort of have a nicer dev experience for configuration, because I don't really love what we're doing there. I hate having all of my different configuration JSON files in my repo, so I want to do something around better secrets management. So Amazon has a nice solution to that. I can say that box has this permission, and it's this environment. It can go and hit key manager and get stuff in. So integrating the config injector stuff with key management is something I want to do. And something I need to do fairly soon is split up my services. But at the moment, where my stack looks like that, as I split up services, I kind of duplicate that stack all the time, and I don't want to do that. So something that is on my roadmap to play with next is something called Traffic. I don't know if anyone's seen Traffic. I know Gert has. Yeah, it looks really, really nice as a sort of API proxy. So I can have a traffic cluster, behind my CloudFront could be my API, and then underneath that I have the services, and Traffic will manage routing them all, and eventually, because in my heart of hearts, I'm a messaging guy, there'll be a message bus underneath there as well. So yeah, that's kind of my road ahead. It's nearly lunchtime. Thank you so much for your patience with me. yeah, like I said, I'm not the expert on this. This is just sort of the journey that I've gone through and some of the choices that I've had to make and the struggle. So by all means, if you have better ideas than me, I would love to hear them, and maybe we can kind of share them with the world. But no, look, thank you very much. I really enjoyed being here.